Will, a big week this week, big day tomorrow, actually, as of the time of recording and when this video will post. The NFL draft is finally here tomorrow. 7 p.m. is when it gets underway. The Vikings with pick number 24 in the first round, one of their just 4 picks in the entirety of the draft. We'll probably be picking later in the night. I don't even know what time that would probably be, 9 o'clock-ish maybe, depending on how things usually play out with the NFL draft. But looking forward to this. Plenty to discuss here, so let's kind of dive into this. 4 picks, as I said, for the Vikings. Picks 24, 97, 139, and 187. When you look at it, for the people who haven't been following along like we have, who have been in the weeds of the NFL draft and all the prospects and the scouting and such, what are the biggest needs for the Vikings heading into tomorrow's draft?
Yeah, the nice thing about what the Vikings did in free agency, and we've talked about this a little bit before, is that they kind of set themselves up where they don't have any glaring needs that they feel like they're going to be pigeonholed into taking this position with the 24th pick or at any point during the draft. Kevin O'Connell said this week they feel like they've set themselves up to focus on impact and bring in some guys who can help add competition at various spots on their roster. And I think they're going to just be able to stick to their board, and it's not going to be at any position, to be clear. Like, they're not going to come out and draft a quarterback or probably a receiver or tight end or a few different ones, linebacker. But at the kind of positions of need that they entered this offseason with, all of which were addressed to some degree in free agency, that being interior offensive line, interior defensive line, cornerback, safety, um, maybe a couple others mixed in there as well. They can kind of just monitor the board, monitor the draft as it unfolds, and try to get good value. So the fascinating thing to me will be whether or not they stay put at 24 and make a pick, or if they trade down, which will all come down to the board, the offers that they get. Do teams want to move up? Because you can't just kind of press a button and choose to move down. You've got to get an offer that you feel good about from a team that wants to come up. So yeah, it'll be really interesting. Not a lot of picks in this draft. Kevin O'Connell said it's gonna, they've prepared as if they have a lot more picks than they do, and they're gonna see a lot of players get taken by other teams that they spent a lot of time with and did a lot of work on. But what that means is when those picks do come up, they should feel pretty prepared based on the process they've had these last few months.
Yeah, I want to get to the strategy of stick and pick or trade down or however they want to do that. I want to get that later on and your thoughts on that. But when you look at the position groups that they do need, I think the general consensus is that there's 4 groups of positions that they could probably take if they do stay at 24: defensive tackle, safety, cornerback, interior offensive line. When you look at those, and you've done deep dives on all those positions over at Vikings on SI. When you look at those, what's your ranking for those position groups in terms of how important they are for the Vikings needs this season?
Yeah, it's tough because it varies based on who's available at that spot. I think there's some positional value that you maybe factor into it as well. I would say number one might be the interior offensive line, just because when you're talking strictly about needs, if there's one kind of hole or weakness or question mark still on this roster, it's probably at left guard, where Blake Brandel did not grade very well last year. And I don't think it would be a disaster if Blake Brandel is your starting left guard if he wins a competition and keeps that job this year. Maybe he'll play better in between Christian Darrisaw and Ryan Kelly, but um, that's kind of a hole right now. And if they could grab somebody early on, maybe it's Ohio State's Donovan Jackson or Gray Zabel from North Dakota State or Tyler Booker from Alabama, if they feel like they're going to maybe switch up their run scheme a little bit and go more gap power, because he's not the most athletic guy, but he is an absolute mauler. Athletic meaning like lateral mobility and the wide zone run scheme and those things. So I would put interior offensive line probably 1. I would put interior defensive line maybe 2, which I know they signed Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave and are kind of set at that position in the short term with those 2 guys and with Harrison Phillips. But it's just such an important position. We've seen the Eagles, how valuable it was to them to have so many different guys that they can just send at you from the interior of the defensive line. And I think you got to think, short term depth, but also long term with Allen and Hargrave both being over 30 and having some injury histories. I think that would be probably number two for me. But if you want to say cornerbacks number two, or even number one, I would understand that too, because cornerback is a premium position in the NFL, and the Vikings have Byron Murphy and Isaiah Rodgers and Mekhi Blackman coming back, a few other guys, but not a ton of proven veteran talent there. So corner is a big one. I would probably put safety last. I think you factor in the positional value of it, where that's just not considered as much of a premium position as those other three. And I mean, interior offensive line isn't generally seen as one either. But at safety, the Vikings, they could certainly address that kind of a year ahead, early in this draft, and plan for this maybe being Harrison Smith's final year. But they feel good about Harrison Smith and Josh Metellus and Theo Jackson coming in to replace Cam Bynum, or sticking around to replace Cam Bynum and having an expanded role. So that's probably how I would order them. But we're not talking about wide margins here. If you want to go in any other order of those four, I get it, and it'll really depend on how things play out, who's on the board.
Yeah, and it feels like with what we've seen, excuse me, in free agency over the last handful of years, it's a little bit easier to find safeties on the free agent market than it is interior offensive line. The Vikings did it; they had to pay out to get Will Fries, and
Yeah.
obviously that'll be instructive into how they probably go forward in the draft and their needs. So you already gave a little bit of a preview into the top 3 or 4 guys for interior offensive line. Let's go through the rest of those. Defensive tackle. If they do go defensive tackle, who are the maybe 3 or 4 guys that could be on the board that the Vikings fans should keep their eyes on?
Yeah, defensive tackle is loaded in this draft class. Mason Graham of Michigan is probably going to be gone. He's some have talked about him maybe falling, but he's been mocked in the top 10 throughout this whole process. But after him, you've got some guys who could go as early as the early teens, but could also certainly be on the board for the Vikings. Graham's Michigan teammate Kenneth Grant is a massive, like 330, 340 pound dude who's a run stuffer, and he can beat blocks, but he can also legitimately rush the passer at that size, which is could be really fun to watch, really valuable if he's there. Then you got a couple other guys. Derrick Harmon from Oregon, he had a really, really productive season last year after transferring from Michigan State. Lot to like about his game against the run, twitchiness again, as a pass rusher. Vikings, I think, met with him formally at the combine, also hosted him for a visit. So they spent a lot of time with Derrick Harmon. And then the other one, Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss, is kind of a fascinating guy who, you could see a team take him in the top 10 with just how freaky athletic and how twitchy he is as a pass rusher. And you go back and watch some of the reps that he had at the Senior Bowl, and just some of his highlights. He looks like he's got the capability of being the best defensive tackle in this draft and one of the best players in this draft. But I think there's some questions people have brought up about maybe maturity or character, or effort consistently, things like that. Still probably needs some development in some areas of his game. So that could cause him to fall a little bit, but he could be a really fun addition to Brian Flores' defense if they go that route as well. So those I'd say would be the top three, and then you start to get into a lot of guys who are maybe fringe first rounders, but probably a lot of day 2 picks at the defensive tackle position. Someone like Omar Norman Lott out of Tennessee has been getting a lot of buzz recently. Tyleik Williams from Ohio State is a really, really good run defender, not as much of a pass rusher. And there's all kinds of different flavors of defensive tackles in this draft that look like they have a lot of upside at the NFL level.
What about cornerback? Who are the top 3 or 4 guys that we should keep our eyes on Thursday night, or even further into Friday, Saturday, that Vikings fans should keep their eyes on at the cornerback position?
Yeah, corner's another fun one where there's a lot of guys in this draft. You look in the first round, Jade Barron out of Texas is one of those guys who's probably, you'd think, going to be off the board. He has a versatility. He's a little undersized, but just a really good athlete, really good playmaker. Kind of reminds you of Brian Branch a little bit, who went in the second round to the Lions a couple years ago and has been really, really good for them. So Barron's one to watch. Will Johnson from Michigan, again, he's been mocked in the top 10, but there's been some more buzz recently that maybe he falls. So that would be one to keep an eye on. Barron and Johnson probably gone before 24, I would guess. So then you're talking about a bunch of different possibilities late in the first round. Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame. Had a better 2023 than 2024, but really intriguing prospect. Trey Amos out of Ole Miss. Savon Ravel Jr. From East Carolina. It was looked like a first round pick in 2023, and then came out last year in like the third game of the season. He tore his ACL. So that complicates the evaluation a little bit. Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky has been really productive and ran like a sub 4.3 at the combine. Those are just some names. There's a lot more. Day two, and then you get into day three and all of that. But those would be some of the corners to keep an eye on early in this draft if the Vikings end up going that route.
Feels like cornerback and defensive tackle are some pretty depth or some pretty deep groups going into the
Yeah.
draft that the Vikings probably will have plenty of options going into days 2 and 3 at those positions should they choose to just stick and pick at that position or at 24 and not choose one of those positions. It feels like those two position groups out of any of the ones of need are the deepest that they could choose from.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that for sure. I think, and we can get into that at some point, that is maybe an argument for the trade down, is that you could get to 24 and see a few different defensive tackles that you like on the board and a few different cornerbacks that you like on the board and maybe a safety or an offensive lineman, depending on how things go. I mean, the Vikings will be hoping, as Thursday night plays out, like every time a team picks a guy at one that isn't at one of those positions, they're going to be celebrating
Yeah.
a little bit. Like every time an offensive tackle goes and a wide receiver goes and a linebacker, a quarterback, maybe running backs like Genty. Anytime people take guys who aren't at maybe those four positions, not that they're going to only be looking at those four positions. Like I think they could legitimately consider a couple others, maybe wide receiver. But they've kind of been seemingly honed in on those four. Those are just the four we've been honed in on that make the most sense for them. So maybe you trade down and you still have somebody you really like, whether that's at like number 30 or 31 overall, or maybe you go all the way down to the top of the second round and you pick up another day two pick that way. It's going to be really interesting to see.
While we say the defensive tackle and cornerback groups are deep, it doesn't feel the same for safeties. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but it feels like there's a very much a top tier class of those guys, and you don't want to miss out on them. Who are some of the names that the Vikings should be or are probably eyeing at that position if they do decide to go safety, which, as you said, might not feel likely because of who they already have at that position?
Yeah, it's possible that they could go safety if they like a player a lot, and then you're getting ahead of the Harrison Smith potential
Yeah.
retirement next year. I mean, who knows? Maybe he comes back for a 15th season, but you bring a guy in and that's some competition with the Theo Jackson, who they gave like really low end starter money
Yeah.
to stick around. They have high hopes for him, but he isn't just going to be handed the every down role. And then you could have a guy learning from Harrison Smith for a year, which would be pretty valuable before maybe stepping into Smith's role. I actually think that safety is a little bit deeper than maybe you're saying. The top two consensus guys are Malachi Starks from Georgia, who I really like. I know it's a Georgia safety, but he's a much different player and prospect than Lewis Seen.
Making a lot of
Um,
Vikings fans nervous saying a Georgia safety here.
super dynamic playmaker. I know it's hard, but you got to scout the player and not the helmet. And Malachi Starks looks like a really good prospect who would be a lot of fun in a Brian Flores defense. And then the other one is Nicky Manwari out of South Carolina, who is a ridiculous athlete in terms of the combine testing, the 40, the size, all of those different things. Had a really good year last year, production. I'm not as high on him, and this isn't from diving in and watching hours and hours of tape. It's just from what I've seen from some of the stuff I've watched and from the way that a lot of draft analysts I respect have talked about him and certain things people have brought up and scouting reports and all that. He just doesn't seem like as good of a fit for the Vikings, and maybe Brian Flores will love him and will really like the athleticism and what he can do coming down and playing in the box and doing some Josh Metellus type things. I just don't think he's as kind of fluid or instinctive of a coverage player as like a Malachi Stark. So I'd be a little surprised if they take Eamon Worry, who is a guy that a lot of people mock to them at 24. But then if you don't take a safety, maybe you trade down and there's a guy like Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame who had 13 interceptions over the last 2 years, led the country Kevin Winston Jr. from Penn State is coming off an injury, but really kind of looked like a first round pick in 2023. And then on day three, I mean, I don't know if these guys make it to 97, but there's guys like Andrew Mukuba from Texas, Billy Bowman Jr. from Oklahoma. There's some safety. There's a little bit of safety depth that I think will intrigue the Vikings if they don't go with like a Starks or Eamon Wari in the first round.
So you mentioned it a couple times. What's the likelihood the Vikings just stay at number 24 and pick there? Because we've seen since he's taken over, Kwesi Documenta isn't afraid to move around in the draft, move around picks, move spots from where he's
Mhm.
at to start the night. We've seen that time and time again. We saw it last year, moving up twice to get the guys that he wanted in those spots in Dallas Turner and JJ McCarthy. What's the likelihood we see the Vikings move out of 24? Most likely dropping down, but there's a possibility, despite the lack of draft capital, they could always move up if they wanted to. Thin as it is, it's still there.
Mhm.
What are we expecting Kwesi to do on Thursday night?
Yeah, I'd be pretty shocked if they move up
Yeah,
just because they have such limited draft capital, and maybe you dip into 2026 or something. I just think that would be really bold
yeah,
with what happened last year and all of the picks that they gave up to. I mean, obviously they moved up one spot for McCarthy, but really they gave up so many picks in two separate trades to go up from originally their second round pick 42. They got the 23rd pick from Houston, and then they go up to 17 to get Dallas Turner, and you
mhm,
give up all this draft capital. It's really why they don't have a lot of picks this year. And then Turner played like through 300 snaps as a rookie, and I still think has a very bright future. He was blocked by two of the best guys in the league at that position, and then a guy in Pat Jones who got a pretty good contract from the Panthers this offseason. But I'm just saying, like, if they were to trade up again, they would have to be right about that
yeah.
guy to further decimate their draft capital. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm like 50-50 on whether they stay at 24 or move back. I think they'll go in probably wanting to, just because, like I said, the depth of this draft at some of the positions that they're going to be interested in. Like you've had people say that from 20 to 60, the class doesn't look all that different, or even from 10 or 15 through 60. Like there's a lot of depth at certain positions, and it's not as top heavy as some years. So I think they'll try to trade back. It's just a question of can they? Not necessarily only that. I mean, if the board is falls a certain way, and there's a guy at 24 like a Kenneth Grant or Gray Zabel, or I don't know, whoever it is that they really really love and don't want to risk missing out on, then maybe they just do it. But if they feel okay about moving down and some of the prospects that'll be there when their pick does come up, I think they'll try, and it'll depend on what kind of offer they get, because you don't want to trade down just for the sake of trading down and take some lowball offer from a team. Like that's not good process. So we'll see. Does a team want to, like the Browns or the Giants or somebody, want to come up for a quarterback? Like I think Vikings fans on Thursday night, it'll be interesting to follow how far Shooter Sanders falls, because it doesn't seem like he's going to go in the top five. And then if he gets past like the Saints at 9, where does he go? I mean, does the Steelers take him at 21 maybe? But if not, that's a guy you could start to see maybe a team wanting to come up into the first round and get him. Jackson Dart, the Ole Miss quarterback, would be the other one who's been talked about as a possible late first rounder. Maybe a team wants to come up for an offensive tackle or a receiver or something, but it just comes down to how the board unfolds, and then do the Vikings get an offer that they like? So I'd say with everything factored in, it feels like kind of 50-50 to me right now, whether they pick at 24 or move down.
You mentioned the quarterbacks, and because of the fact that the Vikings are still supposedly in the market for a backup quarterback behind JJ McCarthy, is that an option later on day three for the Vikings to take a quarterback in the draft, or is that just kind of not going to happen because there are still, maybe if you want, a couple veterans still out there on the free agent market?
I think it's possible, but they're kind of two separate things. Like you're
Yeah,
not drafting a day three quarterback and then that fills your
right.
backup quarterback void. Like with JJ McCarthy having never played an NFL regular season snap, and Brett Rippon being kind of a QB3, QB4 practice squad type guy. He's played a little bit, and the Vikings have praised him, but I think they need a veteran QB2 who has played in the league, and can kind of give you some sort of floor if McCarthy were to miss a game or two. Whether that's Carson Wentz or Ryan Tannehill, who are still out there as free agents, or it's trading for like a Sam Howell or an Aiden O'Connell, like even a younger veteran that they could trade for, just somebody who's played in the
Right.
NFL. And then I do think they could consider. I don't think it'll happen if they only have 4 picks, but if they end up trading down a couple times and get some more picks, you could maybe take a dart throw on a quarterback late. Maybe a Max Brosmer out of Minnesota, or Kyle McCord, or Will Howard, or I don't know, any of these guys, and then have that be like a developmental future backup. I don't think that is going to happen, because that would sort of like you'd sort of be replacing Rippon there with a guy with maybe a higher ceiling. So I sort of look at like the potential of drafting a day 3 quarterback as its own thing, kind of separate from needing a veteran
Yeah.
backup.
All right, so to close out the show today, on the spot, kind of mock draft, if you will, draft sim, if you will, who do you see right now, as we're a little over 24 hours away from night 1 kicking off in Green Bay? Who do you see the Vikings take, or what do you see the Vikings do at 24, I guess? Not just who are they taking, because they could, as we said, trading down. Your mock draft on the spot, what are they doing?
Well, I'm gonna just go with the one that I did and tweeted yesterday, that I was messing around on the PFF mock draft simulator, and I had the Vikings trade down from 24 to 33 with the Browns. Kwesi Dafamensa and Andrew Berry, former colleagues, can make something happen there if the Browns want to come up for a quarterback. And then I had them at 33 taking Donovan Jackson, the guard from Ohio State, who was a guard his first couple of years, 3-time All Big Ten guy. Last year, Josh Simmons, who's projected first round pick, their left tackle, got hurt. So Jackson kicked out to left tackle and played really well there. He was an All-American. But he looks like a guard at the next level. He looks like a really impressive guard at the next level. He's already played a lot of left guard. Like, you could argue that it's maybe a little bit of drafting for need, but I think he's a really good player. So I don't think it's a reach, especially if you're not doing it at 24. I think Jackson's really good, and you could plug him in, and then you're talking about an offensive line with Christian Darrisaw, Donovan
Ooh.
Jackson, Ryan Kelly's, Will Fries, Brian O'Neill. Like, that might be one of the best offensive lines in the league, which would be really helpful for JJ McCarthy. So that would be, I think, much higher floor, much higher ceiling than Blake Brandel at left guard. And then in doing so, if you trade back, I was able to pick up in this PFF mock draft, the 67th overall pick from the Browns, which puts you in range to get a really good defensive tackle or corner or safety or one of those defensive positions, if you do take an offensive lineman with your top pick. So that's the little mock that I just messed around and tweeted yesterday, but I'll go with that for now.
I like it. I was also connecting the dots there for Cleveland while you were doing that. They're trading up because they already picked Travis Hunter with their first pick. They're trading
Yep.
up because Shador Sanders fell, and they're gonna reunite Shador
Ooh, they're
Sanders
going to
and
get
Travis
both
Hunter
the
in Cleveland.
Colorado guys. That's pretty good.
I know Cleveland fans will be
Dion's going to
pulling
be
their hairs
spending a
out.
lot of time in Northeast Ohio.
From Colorado to Cleveland. What a shift for those guys. Looking forward to the draft, Will. Looking forward to your coverage, continued coverage, and draft night coverage, I assume, of it over on Vikings on SI. Go read the rest of our work over at Twins, Timberwolves, and Gophers on SI as well. Hit subscribe to the channel. It does help us get found. Also notifies you every time we post a new video here to the channel. We'll talk to you tomorrow with another topic across Minnesota sports. Talk to you then.